Hi, everyone. My name is Karen McMullen, and welcome to DOC NYC's inaugural Spring Showcase, our mid-year celebration of documentary films and series. I am a features editor at DOC NYC, and it's my pleasure to be speaking today with the filmmakers of The Social Dilemma, director Jeff Orlowski and producer Larissa Rhodes. Welcome, guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Karen.
Yeah, you're welcome. So excited to speak to you. I was mentioning how much I really, how stunning I would say your film was when I first saw it. Um, what a great and important piece of work it was. Uh, so, Jeff, I know your previous works were Emmy and Oscar nominated and award winning films. You were more in the climate space, big nature. And were you, first question is, were you tempted to call this, you did Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral. Were you going to call this Chasing Data at any point?
Chasing Likes came up, Chasing Clicks came up. There are a number of chasing titles, but I think that they're related in their critiques of extractive capitalism, but we felt like the Chasing series was its own thing and it's the natural programming. And so we definitely wanted to veer away from a chasing title for this one.
So, obviously it's super important. Can you just talk to us about what brought you to the story?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with our past films on climate, we spent a lot of time thinking through systems level challenges and what's happening to our entire planet. And it was in 2017 when one of the subjects of the film, Tristan Harris, was starting to speak publicly about this issue around technology. And he compared it to a climate change of culture that invisibly and unbeknownst to us, our technology is shaping the way all of us see the world and interact with each other and the information that we have access to or not. And that unbeknownst to us, we're actually being filtered and we're being fed different information, and that our technology is changing us. And that was basically his thesis. And when I started being exposed to that, it was really like a huge light bulb around this is much bigger than just like somebody posting their dinner photograph. This is societal scale implications. And so I brought it immediately to Larissa, and we started talking through it and trying to figure out if there was a film here. And it took us a while to get to that point, but we knew that there was something really, really powerful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's been, yeah, go ahead, Larissa.
Oh, I was just going to add that I think it was also the recognition of how this issue affects all of the other issues that we care about. And it doesn't matter, what side of an issue you're on, the information that we are getting is different for each person based on your preferences, who you are, your location, the data that they have on you. And that gave us a lot of empathy, I think, and understanding of why in some instances we're so divided as a nation, as individuals on certain issues. So that information ecosystem recognition of it being polluted, much like coral reefs or ice are ecologically polluted, I think was a really interesting moment for us.
Yeah, so the misinformation obviously has had such really devastating negative ramifications on our society and globally and nationally. And this is becoming, at first we didn't know about this, but people are starting to be aware about that. Where is the outrage?
Can you clarify, where is the outrage about the system or about?
About, we know well, we'll go specifically with the selling of our data. We know that our privacy is for sale. It's for the highest bidder. And yet somehow we still,
Yeah,
we still feed into it. Can you talk a little bit
yeah,
about your thoughts on the psychology of why we still
absolutely. I
give it?
think personally, I was a very, very heavy user of social media, and the making of this film was a huge personal reckoning that I went through around what was I liking out of it, what was I getting out of it. I think we always like to think that other people are getting misinformation. I'm clearly not getting misinformation. Everything that I know and think about the world is perfectly accurate and true. And when I went back, and it was an interesting reflection. I looked back at my social media history and saw what was I posting on a regular basis. And I could see how the algorithms, and from my perspective, pushed me and were biasing me and were shifting me down my own rabbit holes, in particular around the 2016 election. That was like, I was so heavily on it, and I was sharing stuff that in retrospect, much of it could not have been accurate. But at the time, it seemed perfectly true, and it enraged me. But these platforms are literally reverse engineering what each of us likes the most. So of course you're going to like it. Of course you're going to like your social media feed. Everybody's going to like their social media feed. And so when we're being fed something that we like all the time, it's really hard to question it. It's really hard to step back and look at the bigger picture and say, wait a second, if that's what I'm seeing, what is somebody else seeing? This was something that our writer on the film, Vicky Curtis, she and I early on, I took her Facebook feed and showed her my Facebook feed. We are close friends, lots of mutual friends, live in the same town. And yet when we looked at each other's feeds, it's like, you're getting completely different information than I'm getting. And this reflection that like her feed wouldn't have worked on me. Like it wouldn't have stuck to me. I would not have had much interest in it, but my feed was completely addictive for me. So I bring this up because, you know, we think of these things as a public square, that, oh, social media is the public square, but it's not. It's a private square just for you. We have an infinite number of billions of private squares where people are being fed their own information and their own little filter. And I think we don't have outreach around it because that's how it's designed, because we're designed into complacency through the system, and nobody has access and insight to the whole big picture. That's what our hope was with the film, was to talk to the engineers and the insiders who helped build the stuff to help explain just exactly what's going on and the failures of the system.
Yeah, there are also rules with, journalism, or used to have rules with television of what you could program for kids at a certain hour, what commercials or things would be allowed. And all of those rules kind of went by the wayside when we moved to this digital world. So those regulations don't exist to help us decide what is a fact. Has it been fact checked? The journalistic integrity, the tweet gets the same amount of real estate as somebody who's spewing conspiracy theories in your feed. So the reality of how that information ecosystem comes together, as Jeff says, is really scary in the fact that there isn't a rule or regulation that's allowing us to better understand what information we're getting from whom, and to what end. And I think that's really the underlying business model of who's making money as a result of that information.
Mhm. Yeah, there, you know, since this is being talked about, and it is at least thankfully being talked about uh, as a problem, what is happening on the political front to bring a stop to this? I know there's organizations, the Digital Wellness Collective, I just assume just by the title alone that it's working on our behalf. But what other organizations are
Yeah,
working to rectify?
I could take this, Larissa, if you'd
Yeah,
like.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
There are countless activist organizations that have really sprung up in the last couple of years, some that have been around for a long time, and some that are really trying to, you know, get this message out to the world, the consequences of big social and more broadly of big tech. And so one of the things that I think is most remarkable, just in the last couple of months, there was a big hearing where Zuckerberg and Dorsey and Pichai, the CEOs of Facebook, Twitter, and Google, were brought to Congress at the end of March. And we've heard many stories for years now around these congressional hearings and Senate hearings, and the notion that the representatives don't really know what's going on and how this technology works. There are kind of fabled examples of that from years ago. But in March of this year, it was such a completely different story. The representatives, bipartisan pressure on the tech companies, bipartisan desire and demand for changes to the system and the way these tech companies operate. I mean, in many ways, I think those legislators felt the consequences of misinformation in our society on January 6th. And they knew, well, wait a second, things that happen on social media don't just stay on social media anymore. And I think January 6th was the realization for those representatives that it can affect them directly, and it's affecting our society as a whole. And by the way, it's affecting pretty much every government out there and countless countries that are dealing with political polarization and misinformation at scale. So there's a lot of political action happening in a way that I don't think any of us could have predicted a year ago or 2 years ago. And it's bipartisan. Politicians on both sides of the aisle. One of the things that we've been surprised by and proud of is that both Nancy Pelosi and Lindsey Graham have referenced the social dilemma publicly, right? They have both praised and shouted out the film. And I don't think you can get two people that are more on opposite sides of the political spectrum. So it's been amazing just to see the political response to the film and to the message.
What do you think about Apple's the iOS 14.5 that's supposed to require apps to ask users for permission to track their behavior? Do you think that'll be effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that they're putting privacy first is a huge step. I hope that other organizations will follow suit. Shoshana Zuboff, who's one of the subjects of the film, talks in depth about surveillance capitalism in her book, and it expands beyond the social media companies. And Apple is obviously not a social media company. I think we're looking at the business model, and as you mentioned earlier, the reality of us as individuals, our time on site, the advertising that's being sold to us is an extractive practice. And the hope is that with more regulation and with more changes within these companies, we have the ability to shift away from that business model and away from that extraction.
Absolutely. +1.
So Jeff, you were pretty close to being one of these tech guys, right? You studied at Stanford. You
Yeah.
studied anthropology, right?
I studied anthropology, yeah.
But you went into you were going to work for Apple, I believe. Yeah. So you have some friends in the industry still?
The only reason why this film exists, honestly, is because of those connections from college and from those friends that worked at Facebook and Google and Twitter. And those are friends that in some cases I helped them get their jobs at those companies. And I was going down that path and was working on startups fresh out of college. And it was, I mean, just to put it in place and time, 2007, 2008, those years, the iPhone had just come out, apps were starting to be developed. It was such an exciting time in the Bay Area, and to be in Silicon Valley and to have that energy and excitement. So there are countless friends of mine that ended up working at those companies and are still there today. That it was those circle of friends that gave me and Larissa and our team those early insights into, like, well, wait a second, like, what are they saying behind the scenes and what are they not saying publicly? And friends who were disillusioned by the story. And so many of us had real rose-colored glasses around the positive opportunities that technology would bring. And still, I am very optimistic about technology. We're using great technology right now. Technology doesn't need to be bad and extractive and exploitative. What we have seen now over the last several years is that there is a certain class of technology that we're not paying for in most cases. The public isn't paying for. I use that as a simple check and rubric around, are you actually the customer? Is it actually being made for you and for your best interests at heart? Or is it being made with some other intention and we're falling spell to the way the system's designed and we're actually being exploited? And I think that's what we've seen and realized, is that this business model that exists at Google, at Facebook, at Twitter, at Instagram, at Snapchat, TikTok, et cetera, this class of, and YouTube, this class called Big Social, that the incentives in the system and the design there isn't with the public's core interest at heart. And that was a huge turning point and reckoning for me, as it was for many of my friends. And unfortunately, not all of them, and that some of them still are at the companies and still are, in my mind, drinking the Kool-Aid or still believing the story that they have spun for themselves. And I have a lot of empathy there. I recognize this analogy might, I think this analogy is apt. If you discovered fossil fuels 100 years ago, and you're like, look at this stuff, we can drill this thing out of the ground and we can drive cars and we can fly planes and look at how awesome we can operate machinery. Look at what this does for society in such positive ways. And then only years later do you realize, wait a second, climate change is a thing and there are consequences, and what have we done and what have we done at scale? That's how I feel about the tech companies. that they tapped into this really, really powerful technology. And for a while, we just saw the positive out of it, and we didn't see all of the implications and the harms that would come out of it down the line. And that's where we are today, is reckoning with the core fundamental business model coming out of big tech, big social, just like we're reckoning with the core fundamental business model of the fossil fuel industry. And those are the two, in my mind, some of the biggest challenges as a society we need to wrap our heads around and change for the betterment of the future.
Yeah, I mean, you said the quote at the top of the film, "Nothing vast enters the life of mortals without a curse." I love that.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
Said Sophocles,
Mhm.
Yeah.
um, has, I mean, what you're talking about is really, interesting. Everybody likes something for free, right? Free services sound great, but surveillance capitalism sounds less great. And it's really funny that the irony is that all these free services have created some of the richest or the richest people, right, ever in the history of ever.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That really surprised me the most. What were you surprised most to learn during the making of the film?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, even what you just said there, I think there's a quote, and I don't actually know, Jeff, if it made it into the film or not, but the true cost of free. And I think our society is reckoning with what is that true cost of free. And I didn't, when I was first working on this project, I didn't really understand how much these technologies influence and change and alter the way that I think. And I think Jeff mentioned earlier, we don't think that we're susceptible. And in the film, Tristan does this magic trick, and I love magic. I'm super susceptible to magic, and it seems to work on so many people. And I think technology did sort of hoodwink us in some way, shape, or form. And it isn't all technology, but especially social media. I wasn't even recognizing, I have my own deeply held beliefs about the environment, and finding out in some cases that some of those were seeded both on the pro and anti side by foreign governments, for example, to try to interfere or cause chaos in our society. That was shocking to me, and made me question, why do I really believe what I believe? And where did I get that belief? And was it influenced in some way, shape, or form by a third party that was not having my best interest at heart? So that really gave me a lot of empathy and understanding, and also, a little bit of doubt and questioning as to where do I find the information and my beliefs, and how do I make sure that I really believe those things and that those things are right to believe in. I don't know, Jeff,
Yeah.
you?
It's funny. I'm sitting here thinking through, what were the biggest takeaways? There are just so many and so many moments where you're like, that's really how this works. Like, and I think part of it is that people don't understand algorithms. I didn't know what an algorithm was. Like this concept, the whole concept of how this technology operates and how it's designed is so hard for the average person to get access to. And it took us years to wrap our heads around it. There was one stat, and this line is not in the film, and we struggled. It was one of the last things that we cut out. It was from Tim Kendall, who built the business model at Facebook, who was on that team, who became the president of Pinterest later. And he shared the inspiration that they saw in Google and the business model that Google had with this advertising model, and how valuable it was for Google, and that's why they wanted to bring it over to Facebook. And the story that he shared was, at the end of the quarter, the financial quarter, if Google didn't hit its numbers and wanted to, like, they weren't at their projections, they could change the size of the font in the ad placement at the top of your search results. And they could make these tiny little tweaks to the box and the size of the font and generate an extra $100 million in the last couple days of the quarter. And you're like, how? Just like, how can, like, one person making this tiny little tweak go from size 8 to size 9 or whatever, right?
Hold it slightly.
Hold it a little bit, just give it a little bit more prominence, and it's going to generate an extra $100 million. Like, it is just so mind-blowing. Like, there's something wrong with the system if one person can type a couple lines of code and fabricate that much money out of thin air. Like, and all of the consequences that are hidden and buried in that we don't see and that we don't understand until now, really. That just blew me away. These companies have such precision over the way the algorithms operate. It literally is just a dial. Like, do we want to make more money? And if you increase the ad placement, it has short-term benefits, but it might have long-term costs, and people might wean off because they're seeing too many ads. And literally, there are algorithms that are optimizing that for each and every one of us around how frequently are you seeing ads versus content, and what type of content, and what's going to get the most money out of you individually versus me versus Larissa versus each and every one of us. And so it's this massive, massive like manipulation that's going on. Like we are living in the matrix. It is that absurd and that wild. But that's sort of my conclusion after working on the film. As crazy as it sounds, like we are already living in the matrix.
Yes, we are. And it's so funny when you say that, you think, well, other people are being manipulated, but I'm not, I'm but it's when I was looking you guys up in preparation of this interview, I was really surprised to see that you have a Facebook page and you're on
Oh,
Twitter. And you're interacting with the social media. Can you
no,
tell how
if
it's
you do
changed?
check, I haven't used either of them in years.
Oh,
I don't
really?
remember. So I had those accounts. I haven't deleted them. So part of it is like there still are valuable things that come out of it, right? Facebook has a bunch of connections of people that I have been connected to in my life. And so if I really needed to reach out to somebody, the only way I might be able to reach out to them is via finding them on Facebook and then sending them a direct message, or and getting them off of Facebook and getting that interaction back into the real world, or on a phone or Zoom call. But I don't use those platforms anymore. I don't use the feed. I don't scroll. I'm not being exposed to their algorithms. I'm not giving them money. This is kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, I also stopped using all social media in the making of this film. I think I have an account still on Facebook or Instagram, but I don't know my password anymore. That was pre my writing those down. So it's out there and I can't figure out how to get rid of it. But I think the reality is for many people, it has become a lifeline during COVID. And I think, people have to make their own decisions about how they want to interact and if they want to stay on those platforms. I think the simplest thing is if there's another option that isn't sneakily manipulating you and making money off of you, why wouldn't you choose that? Our impact team is obviously engaging in social media to try to meet people where they are and bring the information to those people. But then the hope is to take those conversations offline. And I have found, disconnecting from social media, I feel incredibly less anxious. And I've been able to have much deeper, community conversations with my friends and my family. I think there's a difference for everybody, but I encourage people to try it.
Amen. I'll say amen to that,
Mhm.
Larissa. Um, let's talk about your upcoming projects. You do such important work. You have your production company's Exposure Labs.
Mhm.
What are you guys working on next?
The biggest thing that our team has been doing is an impact campaign with the social dilemma. So we have a full team dedicated and focusing on how to leverage this film for change.
An
Uh,
awesome team. They're the best.
a killer team all around the country, super phenomenal. And the team has been really focusing on sustaining public pressure, equipping policymakers, and inspiring and engaging with youth and Gen Z in particular. And so we are thinking through more short form content for that. And how do we just keep the story in the zeitgeist and in the public lens? So that's been one of our core focuses. We certainly do have other big projects that are in the pipeline that we are thinking through, but nothing has been announced yet.
Larissa, you're not going to tell us either?
+1 to Jeff's.
I like this plus one business. It's
Yeah.
very, very handy.
Yeah.
We only have a few minutes left. What else did I want to talk to you about? How about the visual style of the film? I thought it was, I really love the way the interviews were shot, but then you had your reenactments, you had some
Right.
animation, you had some really great stuff. Can you talk about how all
Yeah.
that came together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I just love most about filmmaking and kind of the flexibility of the medium is that you can really use different styles to accomplish different goals and objectives based on the story. When we first started the production for The Social Dilemma, we knew that we were going to have a lot of insiders revealing their knowledge and their expertise around the issue. And at one point, we thought it would be like the minimum viable film we could do would be all talking heads. And so we had that notion in mind. And so at the start, we kind of went overboard with the number of cameras and really wanted to look at giving our editing team flexibility around designing the look and feel of those sit-down interviews in a powerful way. So we put a lot of time into, I mean, those were 5, 6, 7 camera interviews sometimes, with sliders and dollies and beautiful lighting to make sure that the interviews provided a really strong backbone to the film. And then as we were mapping out and editing with that footage and building out a story structure, that's when this narrative concept came about of bringing to life the algorithms and showing how the algorithms work and what's happening and what's hiding on the other side of your screen. And that gave us this concept around going into the phone, seeing this little black box of how an individual person is being manipulated or how their feed is being manipulated and how that content is being crafted and curated for each and every one of us, and to sort of reveal the matrix hiding on the other side of the phone. And that was both incredibly fun and a creative challenge and an artistic challenge and a conceptual challenge. How do we bring this idea to life and how do we make it accessible to people? I think that's one of the things that Larissa and I and our whole team are incredibly proud of. We were trying to push ourselves as filmmakers to bring this complicated concept to the forefront, and hopefully people can understand it a little bit better. And hopefully, you know, somebody finishes watching the film and they pick up their phone afterwards, and you think about your phone in a slightly different way and your relationship to your phone in a different way. So all of those different opportunities to really accentuate and elevate the aspect of the story that we were trying to highlight, and animation as well for some of the backstory and like inside the Google world. It was just fun challenges, and our incredible creative team that was able to come to the table to bring those ideas to life.
Yes, we worked with over 800 people to bring this story to life for a documentary. So I have to thank every single one of them. We wouldn't be here without them. But
Roll
Jen's right.
credits.
It was a challenge, and it was a lot of fun.
Wow, 800, that's like a Pixar movie. But thank you so much for taking the time to do it like that, because it is some dense, heavy, techie
Yeah,
information. You made it very palatable and entertaining and just easy to digest.
awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
And
Karen.
really vital information that we needed to have. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm afraid we're out of time.
Yes.
But thank you so much again for your wonderful film and for sharing it with Doc NYC. And good luck in your future projects. I'm sure we'll see you again soon. Jeff Orlowski and Larissa Rhodes. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Doc NYC.
Thanks, Doc NYC.